introduce our next speaker, Maybin. Aaron is a contemporary artist, educator, community activist, and former professional football player from Baltimore City, Maryland. Selected as the 11th overall pick in the 2009 NFL Draft by the Buffalo Bills, Aaron went on to play in the NFL for the New York Jets and the Cincinnati Bengals before transitioning to a career as an artist, activist, and educator. His work has been featured on ESPN, CBS, Fox, and HBO, and his art, photography, and writing have been exhibited nationwide and internationally. The title of Aaron's talk is Art Activism, Fighting for Change While Under Attack. Please help me welcome Aaron Maybin.
Thank you very much. How's everybody doing today? All right, I'm gonna let y'all know I'm a little bit fired up today. And I'm gonna tell you why. Because everything that could go wrong today has. It's been a rough couple days, you know. We weren't anticipating, my wife and I made the trip from Baltimore up here last night, I'm sorry. Weren't planning on bringing our children. We ended up bringing 3 of them. Son has a stomach bug, so if there's any parents in the room, you already know how crazy that gets when you're traveling and all that. And on top of that, as I'm getting ready to, getting my stuff ready for today's presentations, computer that I had, the presentation that we're getting ready to do completely dies on me. I had a nice little, you know, collection of videos and bells and whistles and all of that kind of stuff, but I'm gonna be honest with you guys, when stuff like that happens, I actually get excited because that means that there are forces that don't want me to say what I'm about to say, and it's gonna force me to try to quit, but at the end of the day, this session right here is gonna be an important one. So I thank everybody that is in attendance. I appreciate you pulling up on me and participating in today's workshop where we just are going to talk about this whole idea of art activism and fighting for change in a day and age where we're under attack. And I think that that is a very fitting title with the point in time that we're at right now as a country. You know, so we're going to talk about a lot of that stuff. But before we get into any of the heavy stuff, I'll give a little bit of my background for those that might not be familiar. So as I spoke before, as you heard in the bio, you know, I am a son of the city of Baltimore, and I am also an alumni of this proud university. Former player here. I was one of Joe's last bowl wins before I made my transition to the NFL. You know, we won the Big Ten championship and played USC in the Rose Bowl. We played in the Alamo Bowl, a whole bunch of dope stuff. And that was a really amazing experience. I learned so much here at Penn State during that time. I learned so much from Coach Paterno and the rest of the coaching staff that recruited me as a very young, brash, some would say arrogant young man from Baltimore City, and really helped to educate and develop me during my time here. And I really was fortunate enough to leave Penn State a young man that was focused on going back into my community in Baltimore and changing it for the better. And regardless of what I've been able to accomplish as an athlete, you know, those accolades are really the ones that I put at the end of the resume. You know what I mean? The work that I'm doing today, the work in the space of education, philanthropy, grassroots organizing, political advocacy, that's my life's work. You know, the doors that we've been able to open in my community in Baltimore City are truly the ones that I'm the most proud of. And that's what a lot of this talk is going to center on today. So let me start by saying, before I could form words and speak, I was creating. I was painting, I was drawing, I was sketching, I was stealing aluminum foil and Reynolds wrap out of my mom's kitchen to make action figures, toys, all of that kind of stuff. I was a really curious and creative child, which in Baltimore City in the late 80s, early 90s was very rare. You know, I didn't have a lot of the same interests as a lot of my peers. I was interested in art. I was interested in dance. I was interested in theater. I was interested in all of these things that, you know, for a kid from Baltimore seemed unconventional. But it was during my time as an athlete that, you know, I became celebrated. I became popular. I became somebody that people recognized. But the creative component was always there. And I always knew, even coming into Penn State, that whenever my athletic career was over, in some way, shape, or form, art was going to be the direction that, you know, my life had taken me on. So when I came to Penn State, I chose to double major. I chose to major in integrative arts and communications. And at the time, integrative arts was a major where you essentially had to come up with a thesis of what it is that you were trying to do here. And I'm taking classes, I'm taking Black Studies classes, I'm taking history classes, I'm taking sociology classes, I'm taking art classes. And the whole thing is, what are you looking to do with this collection of classes that you are taking? What are you looking to learn and how are you looking to apply it? And the funny thing I always think of is I wanted to do exactly what I'm doing now, but I didn't have a language for it. I didn't have a title for it. I didn't have much literature or class education about what it is that I wanted to be. Someone that used art as a tool to change things. Very early, I understood that art is a valuable and very powerful tool when you look at social change, when you look at pride, when you look at narrative, when you look at mental health, emotional wellness. Art influences all of these things in a major way. And it influences all of these things because it does something that very other mediums give you the ability to do. It taps into people at the emotional level and it makes them feel things. Whether you're talking about written art, whether you're talking about music, whether you're talking about visual art, the greatest artists are the ones that make you feel. And those aren't always good feelings. You have certain artists that can prick your soul and make you cry without saying a word, by playing an instrument or by using their voice in song. You have other artists that can make you think through their introspective lyrics. I think about my favorite hip hop musicians and their ability to cultivate feeling with literature in a spoken word form. I think about the paintings that I've seen that I've stared at for hours where I was just trying to figure out what exactly the artist himself was trying to say. That's a powerful position to be in because you have the ability to create certain conversations. You have the ability to shape certain narratives. You have the ability to push people in a specific direction. And you have the choice as the artist what that direction will be. It's always been my belief that you don't just create art for art's sake. All art should have a purpose. And the artists that I grew up idolizing, being mentored by and influenced by, were artists that used their positions to speak loudly to the voices of power and empire of their time. Artists like Nina Simone or Billie Holiday from a musician standpoint. Sam Cooke, Change Gonna Come. That song that you hear during every civil rights movie and on every stage play, it's for a reason. Because every lyric of that song was penned with a specific idea in mind to evoke a certain emotion of the people that heard it. And he did so effectively that it shifted the temperature of a culture at a very pivotal time when civil rights and voting rights and all of these things were at the ballot box being fought for and the streets being organized for. He gave, they all gave in their own way, inspiration to the grassroots organizers and the political activists of the time and allowed the common man and woman in the trenches in the inner cities or in rural communities to tap into that exact same feeling and feel like we're all in some way one. That's a powerful responsibility. And I wanted, once I realized the strength and the power of that responsibility, to contribute in some way to that continuum of artists who use their voices to speak truth to power. Artists that used their talents to create movements and opportunities that ultimately trickled down to the communities in which they lived and in which they served. And that community for me was Baltimore City. So during my time here at Penn State, as I'm majoring in integrative arts and taking all of these different classes, I'm doing so with the idea that regardless of whether or not I end up making it to the NFL or not, when I go back to Baltimore, I'm going to be an artist and an activist. Well, what is that? So I started using the term art activism, but then when I would look at it, when I would look it up, when I would research it, when I would go into the library, when I would go online, I couldn't find any literature about it. I couldn't find any curricula or course of study around it. I couldn't find the tools that I needed to really figure out exactly how to do what I wanted to do effectively. So when I got out of school, and after a few years, I was actually knee-deep in the work of actually improving community in my hometown, I decided to be the one to write it myself. So around 2014, it was my 4th year in the league, and I decided that I thought it was time for me to think about transitioning out of the game. And I did so because I had started my foundation and my work in the city of Baltimore my rookie year. And every offseason, whether it be my rookie year or my last year in the league, I would go back home to Baltimore City and I would do my workshops and programming. I would do my community outreach services. I would do some of the work that I was doing in the organizing and legislative policy space. And at the time that it was time to go back to my respective team to start the season, I would always feel a pull, as if I'm going to do something that I have to do, but my real calling might be right here doing this thing right now. But I still didn't really understand the true scope of the work because for half of the year I was gone. So I made at that point a decision to transition away from the league, to retire and to go back home and to do it full time, because I realized I had gotten to a point where if I wanted to be as great of an athlete as I always wanted to be growing up, I was going to have to take a step back from what I was doing in community and focus completely on that, from a training standpoint, from a diet standpoint, from a just time spent studying film and paying attention to detail in terms of every minute that you're spending in your day. Or I was going to have to take that time, if I wanted to be the type of community advocate, activist, and artist that I wanted to be in the community, and dedicate all of my time and energy towards that. I couldn't play both sides anymore. So I made the decision to come back home and to get into the work full time. And it really took me about 3 years to truly understand how to serve. With all of the educating that I had done of myself that I had done, with all of the classes that I had taken, with all of the history that I had studied, as I said, I was young, I was a little bit brash, I was a little bit naive about what money or resources or access to capital and networking gives you the ability to do when looking at the type of problems that my city was facing at the time. You know what I mean? Like, I was arrogant enough to think that the amount of money that I had made in the NFL was enough for me to come back to Baltimore and change everything. Couple months into that process, I realized that wasn't true. I realized the well of the issues were so deep that there was no way that I myself was going to be able to shift anything. But I started looking at the past, looking at what had been done before and saying, what can be done right now that's practical, that's effective, and that ultimately can grow into something bigger. So the first thing I did was I took all of the education I had done around the subject of art as activism, and I started to write my first book. And in the middle of writing that book, the uprising of 2015 in Baltimore City, after the death of Freddie Gray at the hands of the police department, took place. And seeing my city respond in the way that it did and seeing the national media attention around it, the whole direction of the book shifted from just a academia document that teaches about the history of art activism to a living document talking about the continuum of suffering, of accomplishments, overcoming obstacles that is the Black experience in America through the lens of me, a young Black man from Baltimore City who has firsthand experience with a lot of these issues myself and within my family. And it gave me an opportunity to use my paintbrush, my camera, my pen and computer as tools to control the narrative of how my city was talked about from a national perspective, but really from a local perspective. I wanted to create a book that gave an example of what it looks like to use photography, poetry, essays, paintings as tools to represent the underrepresented, to speak for the voiceless, to show the side of my community that never gets shown on the evening news when we're talked about. And from that book, when that book got published, I didn't realize the impact that it would have because it was the first book of its kind that talked about the idea of using art as activism. So within a year, it was being taught at college campuses that I had never been to. It was being taught in middle schools that I had never gone to visit. And I realized that as dope as that was, there was a problem there because the curriculum itself, I didn't write it. So it was somebody's interpretation of my ideas and how you use those ideas to accomplish a task. But those thoughts and words weren't mine. So I went about the process of creating a curriculum around that first book that became Art Activism, the Workbook Edition. I'll hand this around so you guys can kind of flip through it a little bit and check it out. But this book became a tool and a resource that we used in the school system, in the schools that I taught at, and the spaces where I trained educators. It became, a resource in the mental health space, in the juvenile justice space, where I was able to use my art, poetry, writing, photography as a launching pad for my students, for my mentees, for inmates in different facilities that I worked at, to learn how to use their collective voices to speak to the issues that they were passionate about changing within their community, and using art as the lens to do that. And one of the things that we didn't realize in the beginning when it was created was the mental health component of it, and how in so many spaces, arts therapy is something that's spoken about, but it's never really put into practice in a way that is sustainable or transformative for the people that are participating in it. So I had an opportunity to develop a curriculum around that as well in the mental health space. And that launched, well, I was already a businessman as an artist, selling paintings and illustrations and things of that nature, but when I became an author, that launched kind of my career as an entrepreneur. I became somebody that went into schools to teach these classes, and I started training other educators in how to implement some of the techniques that I explained in the book into their classrooms. And this is right around the time that a lot of these companies that now you see completely doing a 180 started to say that they were going to start prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion. So before that became the new trigger word, I was going into different companies and teaching them about their workplace environment and how they could actually do a better job from an organizational standpoint of reaching out to these communities that they were benefiting from and impacting them in a sustainable way. How they could start to create a culture of investment in these spaces and equity for the people in the community that ultimately were the patrons of their businesses. And it allowed me to do a lot of traveling outside of the city of Baltimore to see that, which I had already seen in many ways, but when you go directly into these neighborhoods, you realize the parallels. You realize that there is no such thing as, well, I won't say that. Every city is Baltimore in some way, shape, or form. Our struggle just looks a little bit different because it has some Old Bay on it, you know? But at the end of the day, every city that I've been to has a hood. Every city that I've been to has people that are struggling. And the people that are struggling are the people that lack the resources that it would take to get out of that struggle and to confront it effectively. And when you talk about the policies, the legislative policies and the laws that are necessary to be changed in order to change that circumstance, they're not even getting the civic engagement and education necessary to equip them with the understanding of how to confront it. So that launched my career as somebody who was working in legislative policy, because not only did I want to be somebody that created art around issues that I felt like needed to be addressed, but I also wanted to work on crafting better policies that would ultimately affect not just myself, but the community in which I lived. And the fact that we don't teach civics in school anymore, the fact that we don't get a lot of the same political education that it used to be a requirement for us to have, it takes something from us in terms of our agency. So as I started to educate myself about those processes, I started organizing the people in my community around these issues and around the systems around the structures that we have to use in order to challenge them. And that has brought me to this place now where I am not just the owner and operator of a rec center in West Baltimore that myself and my partner, another former NFL player, Torrey Smith, opened up in 2020, but I'm also the chair of the Civilian Review Board of Police Accountability in Baltimore City, representing the Western District. I am one of the main lobbyists in my district around the issues that are important to all of our people. And at the end of the day, I'm still in the school system with their kids. So from every tier of my community's political and social process, I have involvement. And all of that stems from the birth of art activism. And when we created it, hold up, how we... I lost the... Oh, okay, so it is going. So this right here was the scope of our curriculum when we first started off. It allowed our students to be able to use art to build connections between one another, but we also would empower them to learn how to use different mediums of art to address these issues that they already said that they were passionate about. So when you think about art that tells stories, what stories are we telling? And how are we telling them? That was very important for me to get through to them, because when I was dealing with a lot of these companies, it would really, a lot of our conversations would go back to what are the stories being told, either in our marketing, in our recruiting in terms of our workforce, and how we serve individuals. What are the myths that we're believing? What are the preconceived biases that we have when going into these communities and saying that we want to serve them? And how do those things impact the processes that we create as a company to try to serve. All of those things are connected. There would always be pushback whenever I would go into one of these companies and I would challenge a belief system that they had about how they wanted to serve or how they wanted to recruit people in their workforce. There would always be pushback, but at least we were finally having a critical thinking conversation about how we could bridge those gaps. And then we come into the age of Trump. Now, let me be very clear. Donald Trump is not the boogeyman. He didn't change anything in terms of society. What he did was he created a space where people that already felt and believed a certain way could be more of who they actually were. And what he did is he changed the public perception around political correctness. I think that before Trump, you had an age of people that were trying to be politically correct where it was expedient, but ultimately serving their own purposes at the exact same time. After Trump, people just felt more confident in who they were to begin with and didn't feel a need to meet you halfway. They didn't feel a need to prioritize diversity, equity, or inclusion because they became, they became a buzzword, a new buzzword of society, a buzzword used to gaslight individuals that have no desire to be in a society that's equitable. People that have no desire to be in a society where I don't hold some kind of weight over you because I'm still a man and you're a woman. Or you don't hold some kind of sway over me because I'm black and you're white. There's a desire somewhat for us to go back to the time where we believed those lies that we told ourselves. That racism isn't still a problem, that sexism isn't still a problem, that Islamophobia or xenophobia isn't still a problem, that there's no responsibility on us as a community, as a country, as a workplace, to be in a position where we're empathetic with one another, where we're operating from a position of having a love ethos. But even though it shifted the public discourse, it doesn't shift the work. But what it does is it forces you to evolve. One second. I love this quote right here. Life imitates art far more than art imitates life. I love that quote because at the end of the day, none of the stuff that we're experiencing right now as a community, as a country, is happening for the first time. If you're a student of history, you'll realize that the public discourse is like a pendulum. It swings one way and then it swings another. When you look at the political landscape, you get the same pendulum swing. From Democrat to Republican, from conservative to liberal, ideology to ideology. Whenever you have organizing around a specific issue and you're able to make a headway in that issue, there's pushback. You got to take a couple steps back, you got to regroup, you got to figure out a new angle, and then you go on attack again. But what happens in our society is we focus on the here and now, and we only really give ourselves the parameters to see about 5 to 10 years in either direction. So when certain things happen, it feels like this is unprecedented. It feels like this has never happened before. It feels like this is something that we can't recover from or we can't make our way through. But that's another lie that we tell ourselves. It's not insurmountable. It's not something that's never happened before. This is not the anomaly. This is par for the course. And when you make great strides forward, there will come certain times where you get knocked back at the same time. But the question is, how do you pivot? How do you regroup? How do you retool? For me, that time was around the time where the public discourse around a lot of the topics that I dealt with heavily in my work started to shift, right? I consider that a time where all of the companies, all of the organizations that wanted to show goodwill of caring about different issues and investing in certain things started to change their tune. That has a trickle-down effect that we never really talk about from the standpoint of entrepreneurship and social organizing, right? I decided to do a very bold thing when I created my brand around something as volatile as social justice. Because according to who is in a position of power, that can be something that is either horribly a horrible investment or a somewhat lucrative investment. Because at the end of the day, the art that I'm creating is not art for art's sake. It's art that's forcing you to have an opinion, right? It's art that's forcing you to stand on something. And one of the issues with that is people are not always going to be standing in your corner when you force them to take a stand. And when you make people uncomfortable and create uncomfortable conversations through the discourse of your work, that's something that a lot of people don't want to have to deal with. So when they started, as great as it was to create something that became school curriculum and became required reading in different places, it was just as disappointing when those curriculums and those books start getting banned. You understand? It's just as deflating as it can be uplifting when those same people that saw value in the conversation, saw value in the work, now say that this isn't acceptable for us to invest in because it's divisive, or it makes us uncomfortable, or it's not something that we want to have to reckon with in a real way. Those are serious conversations that are happening now. Rather than embracing what I think is the American idea of we need as many diverse, radical voices in the discussion as we can, because that's part of what makes us this rich, diverse tapestry of a country that we are. You know what I mean? We need as many opinions to be a part of the conversation as possible. We need as many races to be a part of as part of the conversation as possible. We need as many religions, political party affiliations. We need as many of us participating in this social experiment as possible. But that's not good for business. That's not good for empire, because the more of us are participating, the more of us start to get educated. The more of us start to get educated, the more of us start to realize that my beef is actually not with you, or you, or you, or a white man, or a black woman, or, you know what I'm saying, or somebody in the trans community or the LGBTQ community. It's empire. It's oligarchy. It's the ultra capitalists. It's the medical apartheid system that works its evil work on all of us, not just me in my silo in Baltimore City, but also to the people in the rural communities, to the people on the West Coast, to the people that don't worship like me, that don't see the world through the same lens that I do. And as long as we spend time arguing over branches of the tree, the rotten root continues to go deeper and deeper, and nothing ends up changing for the better. I don't have the luxury of dwelling in that pessimism. So instead of whining and complaining about how these things are happening, we find ways to evolve. So what that looked like for me was I went from being somebody who in Baltimore school system was, if I do say so myself, one of our best educators, we were able to transform the grades, the attendance, and the participation of our students in the community in which I served completely in the 5 or 6 years that I was teaching there. But because a lot of the issues that I spoke up on concerning the school system and concerning its deficiencies would become national stories, I started becoming attacked by people in positions of power within the school system. They didn't want a light being shown on some of the things that was happening. But the beautiful thing about Baltimore's school system is we had site-based budgets at the school. So essentially what that means is BCPS, Baltimore City Public School System, they can be mad at what I'm doing, but because I'm in your school as a contractor and not as one of your employees, you have no power to terminate me. So as long as the principal and the people of the community that I'm accountable to are in agreement with what we're doing, we had the power. So we organized around that. And we were able to build after-school programs where we brought our young boys and their fathers into the school and their mothers and mentors. And we were able to create different programs that didn't exist, that the kids had free access to. I was able to utilize my position as a former NFL player to bring people within my network into the school system to be able to talk to our kids directly, one-on-one, and provide them with resources and understanding that they never would have been able to tap into otherwise. And because of that, we had their support. But things got so hectic, they did something that I never expected them to do. They promoted my principal. So he literally is not the principal of some small Sandtown school anymore. He is the director of principals for Prince George's County in DC at this point. A job he couldn't turn down, you know? But as soon as they do that, they bring in an interim principal that's only there for a couple months, quickly fired me, stop answering the phone when the press and the community association keeps calling, and try to keep it as hidden as possible. I was in a position where I wanted to fight. I wanted to raise hell the same way I had every single time there was a big deficiency within our system that, you know, I created a national discourse and conversation around. But I had realized something very important. You might be able to do small things to help to change certain systems from the inside out, but ultimately, if you don't control the space or own the space, you're beholden to what the powers that be in that system want to do. So it was at that point that myself and my partner, Tori, decided that we wanted to come together to create something of our own, that we owned and operated, that nobody could take from us, that nobody could police us or, for in terms of how we served. And we looked at the community that I grew up in, and there was a building that had been abandoned for about 30 years that once upon a time was a rec center that served that community. And it had been abandoned for so long that I grew up in that exact same community. And the first school I ever went to was literally not right next door, but right around the corner from that exact building. But not only did I never have access to that building, no kid that grew up in that whole community had access to that building. So we decided to use what resources we had, procure this building in the middle of a pandemic, open up and start to serve our community directly. We did so much work serving that community in that short amount of time that in 2023, the Baltimore Ravens and Under Armour decided to come on as our primary sponsors. And currently, as I sit here and speak to you, we're in the middle of a $25 million expansion of that facility. That will be done in August. They don't even realize it yet, but they're in the process of building us a school. 10 classrooms, gymnasium, locker rooms, state-of-the-art football field, track, playground, music recording studio, green screen studio, community library, food pantry, cafeteria, art studio, everything that you would need to have a school. And not only do we have that, but we also have an independent middle high school that is right next to us. So once we're able to get our accreditation and to open up as an elementary school in West Baltimore, in the neighborhood that I grew up in, there will be a completely independent pipeline from elementary through high school that we can use as an alternative to the system that we are already clear on is not serving us the way that we want to be served. I don't believe in, I'm not even saying that for accolades. I don't believe in simply complaining about a problem. I create solutions to these problems. And in creating solutions, we build the market base to be able to create products that serve community and also allow us to fill our coffers so that we can continue to expand on the work itself. That model has served me for the past decade. Being able to do independently what I can't depend on a sponsor or a benefactor to fund me for. For a long time, the blueprint for artists and creatives was to find a benefactor, was to find a university, was to find a think tank, was to find a rich benevolent donor that would sponsor them to study an issue and to create solutions to it, that would help to fund research and help to fund materials gained and all of that kind of stuff. And what it did is, I hate to say it, but it made prostitutes out of all of us. Because what you end up doing is bastardizing yourself out to these rich benevolent donors, doing whatever it is that they want you to do, just so you would have enough left over to put a little bit towards your passion project. That's not a sustainable solution for me. I needed to be in a driver's seat when it comes to developing curricula, when it comes to developing processes within community, and when it comes to controlling narrative. And from the art activism curriculum that I created, we were able to also put out a line of children's books, coloring books, where in the mental health space, in the education space, and in the juvenile justice space, we are able to give our kids outlets to see themselves in a light that's different than the versions of themselves that they're usually force-fed. We're able to start to create a narrative around how they see themselves, how they speak about themselves, how they view themselves, and ultimately how they're able to set goals for themselves. And we're able to help to shape the direction of what that looks like as educators, as mentors, as coaches, but ultimately just as servants. So the work continued to evolve because I refused to be boxed in or defined or put in a position where you can deem my project something that can be banned. It's fine if you want to ban art activism, but you're going to have a hard time finding justification for banning this project or that project or that project. And those put me in a position where, for my most recent book, I could do my most ambitious thing yet, which was the publishing of Getting on Code. What Getting on Code is a communal conversation in book form. In Getting on Code, I looked at all of the areas in my community that I served in and dissected the many places that at least in my humble opinion, we in my community were out of code with one another. And in each subject, I laid out what my thoughts and practices are in those areas. But the most powerful part about the book is, after each chapter, there are discussion questions. for the readers to say, okay, that's what Aaron does and that's what he believes. But what should be our household code amongst one another? What should be our familial code? What should be our community code? What should be our code in the workplace, in our church, in our school, in the places in which we organize? And what that has allowed us to do, because the same way I did with the workbook, I created a curriculum around it. And instead of going directly into the schools, I established these as support groups that we set up in all of these different neighborhoods. So I was able to do the first cohort with people within that neighborhood, and every cohort after, they do themselves. And what that allows them to do is figure out, what are the ground rules for us in this social contract that we have with each other, in our community, in our household, in our school, etc. How do we want to speak to one another? How are we going to deal with one another? What are the ground rules? What are the do's and don'ts? What do we agree on? What do we disagree on? All right, now let's take everything that we disagree on and throw it out the window, and let's focus on this area that we agree, and let's build around that. Let's organize around that. Let's lobby our schools to do better in this area. Let's lobby our politicians to do better in this area. So essentially, by allowing people to get themselves on code and then establishing a set of ground rules with their loved ones, with their neighbors, you're able to get them actively engaged in dialogue, conversation, and eventually organizing. And once they start organizing, that's where the fun begins. Because you're now in the driver's seat and figuring out what the changes need to be to reshape your neighborhood. Ultimately, then your city, then the country. You're able to be in processes of saying, who do we want representing us in elected office? Let's support these people now ourselves. Who do we want making decisions on our school board? Who do we want our sheriff to be? And now, instead of just looking at the list of people who we're supposed to pick from and saying, man, I hope they believe what we believe. I hope they believe or support this thing that I want supported. If we have enough of us on code with one another, we're bringing them in, and we're not requesting, we're demanding. Either you're going to advocate for us to have these things that we've determined are non-negotiables, or not only are we not going to support you, we're going to throw all of our support, all our money, and all of our resources behind your competition who has agreed to meet us where we are. That's how we actually get things done. So now when we're in this space where, not just in the school system, but in society and culture, all of these things are being attacked, as hard as it is for me to deal with it, and it's hard, believe me. Look, I'll be honest with y'all. The first 10 years of me doing this work was as tough as anything that I've ever done in my life. When you talk about raising the money necessary to get a lot of these things off the ground, when you talk about establishing resources and infrastructure that make it sustainable, when you look at paying people a living wage that they deserve, that work with you, and not monopolizing their time, those things are very difficult. But we always made it work, regardless of how much support that we had. It wasn't until the past 3 years, for the most part, of my life that we actually had funders and donors behind a lot of these initiatives. A lot of the things that I've accomplished to that point was just according to what I was able to do myself. But over the last 3 years, we've actually started to build a coalition of people who are willing to invest in these things because they believe in them. In Baltimore City, just to give you guys an example, when I grew up there, it was pretty much standard practice that every year we were going to have at least 300 to 350 murders and homicides in our city. Sad thing to say, but that was just kind of accepted fact. And For the last probably 5 years, we've had a lot of discourse around it because our mayor came into power and decided to do a very radical thing. It's called the Group Violence Reduction Strategy. If any of you guys are curious, you can look it up online. It's Mayor Brandon Scott in Baltimore. But this is coming out of the uprisings and the protests and the organizing that took place after George Floyd's death in 2020. A lot of us on the ground were organizing around this idea of why we pay our police departments over half of our city's budget rather than investing in preventative measures to crime, because you already know police only get called after crime has been committed. So if you actually want crime to go down, you need to be investing in a societal safety net. You need to be investing in education. You need to be investing in recreation. You need to be investing in mental health resources. But instead of doing that, we just pour more and more of our city budget into the police budget and expect them to do the job of a therapist, a social worker, an educator, a mentor. No, they lock people up. So if you want somebody to do all of those jobs that you're now expecting them to do, you need to pay the people that do those jobs and give them the resources necessary to be able to go into these areas where depression, crime, poverty, food deserts, access to resources that are below standard is common practice. We need to invest in those areas. But coming out of this whole age of protest where everybody was talking about defund police, invest in community, our mayor chooses not to defund our police department or really take a whole lot of money out of their budget, but he looks at finding a way to use federal dollars, subsidies, grants, and all of that kind of stuff to pour into these areas that actually do that work that I spoke of. And to focus our policing power not just on making senseless arrests, but on identifying who the people are in our community that are doing the majority of the crime and figuring out what they need, whether it be education, whether it be mental health resources, whether it be access to affordable housing, food, all of these things. Because as somebody that's from Baltimore, I know nobody's just out here to commit crime for the sake of committing crime. There's a root cause, there's a reason. So if you address the root cause, you stop the crime. So he starts this radical idea, and of course, everybody on the other side of him politically says, you know, Baltimore's about to go to hell in a handbasket. The murder rate's about to go sky high. And it did for a few months, but that's also coming out of a pandemic, a global pandemic where people don't have money, where people are locked in their house for an exorbitantly long amount of time, and everybody in the country is struggling. So we had that spike in crime coming out of COVID, and everybody says, hey, look, see, we told you, look at Baltimore right now, look how dangerous it is. But we continue to invest. We continue to stay the course. Then the next year, we have a 20% reduction in violent crime and homicides in Baltimore City for the first time in over a decade. And then something crazier happened. This past year, we had a 25% reduction in violent crime and murders on top of the 20% reduction. For the first time since before my childhood, Baltimore was under 300 murders, which isn't anything to brag about. But when you look at the effectiveness of what works and what doesn't, we're trending in a better direction. And that's not because of being tougher on the crime, but it's because of being more empathetic with the community, being more understanding of what the needs are, and actually having enough courage to do something. So if we know that this trend is still continuing to go, regardless of what happens at the federal level, we got to stay the course. But what happens when As soon as the president gets elected and he says, hey, anybody that's investing in DE or I, your funding's getting cut off, buddy. Anybody that's going to stand 10 toes down on this being your issue, if you're getting federal funding, good luck. I'll be honest with you. The biggest blessing in the world was the fact that the Ravens and Under Armour were our funders for our rec center, because I was worried about construction shutting down for a minute. And still, you know, with some of the policies in terms of how it trickles down to things like construction, we've had things come up, but thank God we've been able to maintain. But from a community level, where a lot of that funding was coming from grants and certain opportunities, by November, gone. Figure it out. Pivot. You know what I mean? So now, for the first time in at least 5 or so years, we had to hit the pavement. We had to figure out, all right, how do we get creative in terms of fundraising now? How do we get creative in terms of how we label the work? Because even labeling something the wrong way now can have political ramifications. But it doesn't stop the process itself. Because if you give up, what is the alternative? To go back to business as usual and the status quo? I never accept that. I never accept that. There is no going back. So how do we do that at a large scale? I go back to art once again, because it's the universal language. It's the universal language. It has the ability to do what my words can't. It has the ability to do what a gun can't. It has the ability to do what so many other things can't. It can connect us because it gives space for us to say what we feel, but then it actually gives space for us to inspire action. So what we've done is, at least at a local level, we utilized our art in a marketing campaign targeted not just at our youth, but also at our adults. Because, as I said earlier, civics is no longer taught in schools. People no longer are educated about how they go about creating some of the changes necessary to create a better society. So what we're doing this year for the first time ever is we're announcing a cohort of all of Baltimore City of political and civic education and advocacy. So we're going to have a cohort of 100 individuals from all across the city that are leaders already, that the community itself has said could be in a leadership position, whether that be a policymaker, an alderman, a senator, a mayor, a community leadership position like I have on the Civilian Review Board. And in this cohort, which will be 6 months long, they will get a crash course in civic advocacy and campaigning and all of the issues within the city and all of the processes that have been effective in making change so far. And then once these people finish with this cohort, we're gonna run them ourselves as a community. We're gonna help them fundraise. We're going to help them get the support of the people that are already in positions of power that have been the kingmakers of the past, because we have the numbers to do so, because we actually can vote people out if they don't go along with what the community wants. A lot of times we'll look at what's going on at a federal level and we'll kind of see it as a doomsday scenario. I don't see it as that. I see it as an opportunity, because the things that happen at a state level are so much more immediate for us than what happens at the federal level. And what happens at the state level often trickles up to the federal level. I don't believe in things trickling down. Reagan already showed me that trickling down isn't good for my community. Never really makes it down there. I think the water stops halfway some point, never ends up making it to the ghetto. But when we're able to build sustainable changes from the ground up, now that has power. And that can go as high as the federal level. So we've reshifted our focus from a top-down approach to a ground-up approach. And that's been very successful for us because it's allowed us, even in this time where the pillars of the work that we do are being attacked, to still be able to insulate ourselves somewhat, because we do have something that you can't legislate away, and that's community power, community support, and community buy-in. And that only happens because we've been able to get on code with one another. So we as a village decided what was best for us and what direction we wanted to go in, and now it's incumbent upon all of us to stay that course. But for myself, this is still just the beginning of the work. I see what started with art activism being something that we utilize, not just in Baltimore, but also in cities like it across the country, from Detroit to Oakland, Philadelphia, all over. And what we've been able to do over the past few years have been transformational because we've built coalitions with individuals in these cities and organizations within these cities to start to share resources. So the blueprints that I create, the curriculums that I create, the things that I have sold to Fortune 500 companies, educational systems, and all of that, we resource share with one another, not attached to money, but just attached to the idea of we want to see this thing be successful. We want to see our communities rise. And I think that when we've been, the balance that we've been able to have between the economics of it and the social components of it is a beautiful marriage, because it allows us to hold ourselves accountable, but still forces us to be creative in terms of how we evolve. Because we know that the strategy of our opponents evolves with us. You know what I mean? So every single time that we change something, they change something. Every single time we adopt a new strategy, they adopt a new strategy. And that's fine. That's how it goes. And I'm in it for the long run, so I'm not tripping off of that. But at the end of the day, I'm committed to the end goal. The end goal is the city that I love, that I'm raising my own children in, that I ultimately will hand off to them one day. I want to hand them a better version of Baltimore than my father handed me. And I want them to hand their children a better one than I handed them. And I believe that they will, because they're growing up seeing an example of what it looks like to change things from the ground up. They're growing up seeing the kind of long-term commitment that it takes to actually make change. That's the only problem I think really exists. We live in a microwave society. Exactly, instant gratification. We live in a microwave society. Everybody wants it, they want their change to come right away. But that's the thing about microwave food. That's why it tastes different, because it don't got the right seasoning. You know what I mean? You didn't slow cook that. So it's not gonna taste the same. It's not gonna be sustainable. It's not gonna fill you up for a long time. It's just gonna be something quick. But the things that take a long time, the things that you are actually intentional and critical thinking about creating, that can have long-lasting ripple effects for generations. This school building that we open up will ultimately be something that serves generations in a way that we didn't have access to in that exact same community. These curriculums that I'm creating, the college version of me now has something that they can study that prepares them for the world that they're about to go into and change for the better. Every chance we have an opportunity, we have to take that step forward, because somebody else is following along our footprints. They're following behind us, and they're looking for a blueprint, they're looking for a path, and we can provide that path. But we gotta be intentional about what direction we're going and how we're getting there. I appreciate you guys staying for this entire time and listening to my long-winded self give you this long soliloquy. Thank you. Do we have any questions? I know that was a lot, but I think that in this space, it is usually best for me to engage rather than just to ramble on. I know a lot of you guys in here are potential business owners, are potential change agents, are people that yourself are looking to shift the discourse culturally around things that you're passionate about. What is it that you guys are still trying to figure out, and how do you think some of these steps might be able to help along that process? I'm opening it up now for anybody that will want to ask a question or two. Yes?
I have a similar story. Instead of Baltimore, it's Pittsburgh.
Very familiar with Pittsburgh too.
And the surrounding areas, poor areas where industry has moved away, opportunities have moved away. And so my question to you is, what's the first step?
Educating yourself. Like, it sounds boring, but like, half of the work that I do stems from me at least understanding how things got exactly the way that they are. For example, when I first realized that my life's work was going to be in Baltimore City, I had my perspective of what I grew up looking at. But what I didn't really know was the history that I wasn't taught in school that contributed to that. So for example, so you're talking about Pittsburgh, so it's very similar to Baltimore. I'll give you this example. In Baltimore, it used to be a shipping town. We got a port, you know what I mean? The same way Pitt does. So my grandfather and most of the dudes that I grew up with's grandfather was from the South, was from Alabama. Migrated north during the Great Migration during the Jim Crow era to escape things like racism, you know, Jim Crow, sharecropping. They came up to Baltimore because even with a third grade education like my grandfather had, he could still get a job at the port, at the shipyard, that paid him a living wage that he could use to own a house and raise a family. Pretty much all the dudes I know in Baltimore that are from there have that exact same story. So during the deindustrialization of America, when we start closing all of our shipyards and industrial plants down, our automotive plants and things of that nature, shipping them overseas, we know how it affects our capitalist friends' pockets and bottom lines, that they're able to get cheaper labor, you know what I mean, and raise the profits for themselves. But what we also know, but aren't really educated about, is how it gutted the industry of our communities and our cities, right? So when I'm growing up and I'm just thinking about living in the crack era, you know what I mean? Like seeing all of these people that I grew up with, their parents, struggling with addiction and poverty and all of that kind of stuff. I'm seeing them struggling with addiction and not knowing what they're trying to medicate away. Not knowing that this man has worked his entire life, but now his job has just disappeared, and he doesn't have the skilled labor necessary to transition into another field. That job isn't sitting here waiting for them. And then when you look at our elected officials, they knew that was going to happen and didn't invest in any transitional programming for any of these people. Didn't give them discounted education on trades and schools and resources that they could use to move into something different. So from a communal standpoint, all of us are responsible for that because we didn't push them to do that as a community. We weren't organized enough to demand that of them. So when I see how the city has deteriorated even since that time, when the industry has disappeared, my understanding of why is different. So yes, I can work on the whole idea of creating the societal safety net and all of that kind of stuff. But if we don't address the fact that we have an issue of jobs that people have access to in that exact same area, none of the stuff I'm doing over here matters at all, because the problem's not going to change. You know what I mean? So even in how we talk to big companies like Like, because Bethlehem Steel was the big company back in the day that everybody came to Baltimore to work for. But Amazon was, Amazon has a facility in Baltimore, but they were looking at possibly putting their main facility there a few years ago. And folks were upset at certain policymakers that we had for essentially making Baltimore's bid for them too good. Like, they said they wanted to give up too much to get the company there. But I didn't argue as much against it as everybody expected me to, because I understood that at least that would translate to a certain amount of jobs for those people, because that's what we negotiated. We said, all right, if we do give you this facility here, this is the amount of jobs that we want this demographic to have access to. This is the amount of affordable housing that we want you to build to offset the amount of space that you're about to now take up, and people won't be able to buy into it. You understand what I'm saying? So like that part, like learning the root causes of the issues that it is that you're looking to address, and then with the people that you're looking to serve. My biggest problem in the beginning coming out of school was my arrogance. The fact that I thought that I could parachute into this neighborhood and with all of my benevolent resources say, hey, I'm gonna change this for you, I'm gonna change this for you, I'm gonna change this for you. And they're like, dawg, we ain't asked you for that. Talk to us. You know what I mean? Let us counsel you in terms of what the things are that we need, because we've been here our whole lives. We didn't leave for a few years to do that football thing. Like, we appreciate that you want to serve, but don't just come and tell us what you think you're going to do for us. So even learning so much about that process, when we built our rec center, the first thing we did was we canvassed the whole neighborhood for weeks, knocking on doors, introducing ourselves to people, learning people's names, getting relationships with the schools in that district, hosting town halls and community listening sessions where we ask them really important questions. How do you want us to serve you? What do you want us to build here? The first thing, like it sounds cliche, but the first thing they said was a playground, right? And long story short, we come up with all of these other things that we're about to build the same way and all of that, but when we get the benevolent givers in the equation, the Under Armour, the Ravens, all of that kind of stuff, and then the contracting company that we dealt with, we reached a point where the contractors are looking at the budget and they say, all right, it's looking like we're not going to be able to put the playground where we want it to right now. Let's build all of this stuff, and then once we get done with this, we'll build the playground afterwards. And I'm like, I don't think that's gonna work. Like, why? Community, they say they wanted to put, they said the first thing they said they wanted was a playground. Well, okay, we're still gonna give the playground though, but eventually, it doesn't work like that here. What do you mean? These people, their whole lives have been told, hey, you're getting this thing. And then they're told, hey, can't give you the exact thing that you asked for, but we'll get to it later, and later never comes. I know that's not what you guys are intending to do, but my name is on this, and you're not gonna put me in a position where they think that that's what I'm doing to them. We're gonna find the money to get this playground. You understand? Like, but if I don't have, and they didn't believe me in the meeting, the closed door meeting that we had, so you wanna do a community listening session? Let's do it, I'll set it up. When I tell you, that community nearly ate those corporate cats alive. Like, I'm talking cussing them out, like throwing stuff like, yo, y'all do this shit all the time. But they said, yo, we didn't know. A playground was that important to them? Yes. They've wanted it for decades. They've lobbied for it for decades. And we promised to give it to them. So we're not gonna go back on our word, even over something in your mind is insignificant as a playground. It's not insignificant because they say that that's what they need. And as a parent, I understand the importance. Like, I'm not living in no area that doesn't have a playground that I can take my kids to so they can just be kids. You know what I mean? And in a city like Baltimore, the murder rate can be sky high, but if you If you don't give our kids anything productive to do, what do you expect them to do? So if they don't have the football teams and the basketball teams and the STEM programs and the art programs and the community programs and the dance programs and the theater and the tech, if we don't give them productive things to participate in, they're going to find community either way. And the same way a club is a community, so is a gang. Take your pick. They're going to do one or the other. But they're not just going to disappear because you don't give them the resources that they need as human beings to develop and grow. So that's the thing. Like, for me personally, I would say just understanding the history of how the issues that you want to change got that way, and then being intimately in communication with the people that are being served and having them be a part of the dialogue of what the new process looks like. I think that people are always much more invested in the solution when they feel like they had a hand in helping to create it. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Aaron, what does success look like to you when your school comes online? And I know that will change over time. Year one success will be different than year five success, but just talk a little bit about how you envision this venture of yours being successful over time. What are your main goals for it?
My main goals are a few things. That's a great question. The wraparound approach is really important to me. And by wraparound approach, I mean a lot of times in schools, when it comes to pedagogy, we focus on kids like they're not whole human beings. We focus on one component of their development and we ignore other components, right? I personally believe that every school should have a trade school element to it. I believe that college prep is extremely necessary, but the fact that we don't have a choice in that matter is damaging because not every kid wants to go off to college for 4 years and then, get like, a big corporate job. We need people that are skilled tradesmen in our communities. We need people that are working practical jobs and people that are very skilled doing those jobs. So having not just the college prep track, but having the trade track, but also we have an agriculture track. We have a greenhouse and a community garden at our site that we run in partnership with the Independent Middle High School, where our students grow their own food and plant their own crops. We have a partnership with the local conservatory where we get different plants from the conservatory to plant around our space, making it one of the city's green spaces. So things like that, but also being able to have the components of an art school within a regular school. So a lot of the classes and programs that we're going to be able to do in other parts of the city, you can only get if you go to a Maryland Institute College of Arts or a Peabody Conservatory, or you understand what I'm saying? So making these things accessible. Our kids lack certain skills and resources, not because they're not interested or they don't have the aptitude for it, but because we don't expose them to it and because they don't have the resources. Like, for example, my mother was an All-American lacrosse player at Rutgers. Because of that, I know about lacrosse. I've played lacrosse before. Like, most of my young black friends growing up didn't even know what lacrosse was. But just by proximity to my mother and because I was able to play as a young kid, I've been in spaces where people that I've developed corporate partnerships with, you know what I'm saying? Like, that I met in that space. Same with things like golf. But in Baltimore City, if it's not what people know Baltimore City for, it doesn't get included. It's not a part of what we feel like they need to be introduced to. And the same with the mental health and emotional wellness space. We're a hard city. You know what I mean? And a lot of our kids feel like they got to walk around, hard, because that's just how we live. And I grew up that way. But I can't tell you how many things as a grown man I've had to unlearn and relearn something different because what I was socialized to believe in as I grew up didn't serve me. And it didn't serve my community. It doesn't serve my children if I teach it to them. And I don't want to replicate problematic ideology with my own children, with my students, with my mentees. So when I talk about a wraparound approach, I talk about a space where accountability is very heavily prioritized, but so is understanding and empathy. You know what I mean? Where discipline is important, but so is you being in a good space. You know what I mean? And you can be gentle and demand greatness at the same time. And I don't think that our kids see enough of an example of what that looks like in the system as it is. And I think that that's because we're too focused on teaching to standardized tests that don't connect with or represent our students and not figuring out how to teach them in the manner that they learn. You know what I mean? And a lot of our, like for example, when I was in the Baltimore City school system, I was diagnosed with dyslexia. I was diagnosed with as being hyperactive. They tried to medicate me, and thankfully, my parents, when they saw me, I was so doped up when they tried to medicate me that they were like, yo, this isn't our son. Like, whatever he's dealing with, we'll deal with that, but we're not just gonna do this to him. But so many of my peers didn't have parents that caught that. You know, so we try to medicate a problem away rather than figuring out what's going on in this kid's head, what's going on in their heart, what's going on in their neighborhood, what's going on in their household. How do we improve that? Once we improve that, the results that we get in terms of their educational process, they skyrocket. And they feel like they are in a community that values them. A lot of time we demonstrate to our kids through what we invest in, what we don't, and through how we treat them, that we don't truly value them as people. You know what I mean? We rule over them and require things of them, but we don't truly value their whole development. And I want to continue to create the example of what it looks like to do the exact opposite. I want the blueprint of how we're able to get through to our kids to be the blueprint that the other educators in the city and eventually the country measure themselves by. So I know that was a lot, but in a nutshell, that's what I hope. And in terms of success in general, I really think about this a lot. When I was in the NFL, when I was making more money than I've ever made in my life, I was more depressed than I've ever been in my life. And I realized while I was there, I realized that I didn't need as much as I thought I needed to be happy. You feel what I'm saying? I built a castle for my parents, retired them, moved them out of the city down south. You know, they're pastors down in South Carolina now, along with my siblings and a few of my aunts and uncles. But I still live in West Baltimore in a row house that a couple years ago was in between two abandoned buildings. Now the buildings are fixed up, blocks a little bit better. You know what I mean? Like, but I'm still right there in the same neighborhood that I taught in Sandtown for so many years. So the kids that I've taught in elementary school, I now have them as high school students. They still come by and knock on my door because they know where I live. Their parents know where I'm at, you know what I mean? I'm truly accountable to my community. I want to create a blueprint for cats that believe that they have to escape their environment rather than come back to it and make it better. Because when the smartest among us, when the most resourceful among us, when the most gifted among us leave, they take their resources with them. They take their skills with them. They take their wisdom with them. I think that we need to bring that the ones that grew up in those environments need to bring those skills back to those environments to improve them for the better. And we don't have enough examples of what it looks like to do that. So I wanted all of my students, all of my kids, all of the people in my community to see what it looked like for a guy to do that. And not be a person that came back is trying to look like I'm doing better than everybody. Like, I live very humble, You know what I mean? I live very, you know what I'm saying, casual, but you can't tell me that I'm not richer now than I was then. Because wealth to me is defined differently than it used to be. It used to be money. It used to be proximity to opulence and you know what I mean, like expensive things. But it's not. Wealth to me is the people in your in Baltimore City, where the crime rate is what it is. I can leave my front door wide open, and nobody will come in my house. We've done that. Like my kids have done that before, where they've just left the front door wide open, and the dudes that any other day would be hustling on the corner down the street will literally come over to my house and stand guard at the door until somebody inside the house comes and closes the door. You don't get that kind of community and love, you know what I mean, in many places. And most people would never believe that you could get it in Baltimore. But that's my everyday existence. And the other problematic stuff is still there. But I want to expand on that, because that for me is something that we can build on as a community, as a city, as a country. You know, if we're able to tap into that, if we can handle each other and treat each other with grace and love, not because we want to be seen doing it, but because it's the right thing to do. You know what I mean? And be involved in transforming our communities for the better, not so people can pat you on the back, but so that they can say, damn, man, like, I need to get involved with that. I say all the time, like, I feel like if I'm sitting there digging a hole, right? I'm digging the hell out of this hole right here, and somebody comes and says, damn, Aaron, look at that hole you digging. You might be the best hole digger I ever seen. Look at this hole, it's so deep. I can't believe you just dug this great hole. I'm sitting there like, man, don't tell me I'm digging a great hole. Like, pick up a shovel, get down here and help me out. You know what I mean? Like, I want to kill the idea of us like putting people on a pedestal that are doing good things in our community. Like, oh, that's a thing that Aaron does. No, that's a thing that we all should be doing. He's just giving an example of what it looks like to do that. That was good, though. Any other questions? Going once, going twice. All right, man. I really appreciate you guys. It's been, go ahead.
I know this might be from the left field, but I do want to ask, as a person who has gone mainstream in football, how was the response when you came back to activism and all of that? Like, I assume there might have been some negative, there might have been a lot of.
Bro.
How was that?
That's a great question. All right, so let me sit down real quick. So everybody to a T in the beginning thought I had lost my damn mind. Chief among them, my parents. Well, no, my mother is an amazing woman. I'm closer to my dad, but my mother knows me best. You know what I'm saying? Like, and she's not even my birth mother. My birth mother died giving birth to the sister that's right underneath me. But I don't call her my stepmom, but my stepmom knows she's an artist like myself. She always was somebody that, when I was dealing with depression, anxiety, all of these things, she understood what art was for me in terms of a release. But she also saw the gift really early and was like really adamant, like, yo, you're gonna be an artist one day. You know what I mean? Like, you're an artist right now, but one day people are gonna know your work all over the world. And my father knew that I was talented, but like any father, I think that he was afraid. You know what I mean? Because so many athletes, transition out of the game, and a few years after, are broke, are depressed, are, I got a few guys that I've played with that are no longer here. You know what I mean? Because of suicide, because of drugs, because of, life situations that have happened. So I think that it stemmed from a place of worry. But my father literally asked me, like, have you lost your mind? Like, why the hell would you do, like, yo, play for another 3 years at least, and like, you know what I mean? Like, stack up all that you can for this transition and do it practically. But my mother understood, and she didn't necessarily believe that it was going to be easy. She was like, I don't know how you're going to do it, but I believe that you're going to be able to do a good job, whatever it is that you do. But everybody, like in the neighborhood, in the community, they didn't understand it. And I kept on, I would try to explain it as clearly as I could that, you know, if I were to drop dead right now, God forbid, and the greatest thing somebody could say about me was that he was a damn good football player, in my mind, I've wasted a lot of life. You know what I mean? If that's the sum of what I've given to the world, then what have I really done? Yes, it's dope that, you know, this game has taken me as far as it's taken me, but it's a kid's game at the end of the day. And the key thing to me has always been, what do you leverage that platform to do? The athletes that I looked up to growing up were the athletes that were bigger than their respective sports. You know, the Muhammad Alis of the world, you know, the Jim Browns of the world, you know, the Paul Robeson is a North Star, you know, of mine, because he, professional athlete, college educated brother, but art activist. Before the term was even, you know what I mean, a term, like literally sacrificed the fame and Paul Robeson should be the Harry Belafonte that people speak about. Paul Robeson should be the Sidney Poitier that people talk about, but you know, the Denzel, but because of the stances that he took politically, because of the sacrifices that he made, he was ostracized, he was blackballed, he was erased by many from the history of public discourse, but he existed, you know, and he influenced somebody like me to think that, yo, if you get to that level, like, yeah, use that level to shine a light on your city, on your community. But I'll say this, my father, about 2 years ago, well, a year and a half ago when we broke ground on our construction, before we broke ground on the construction, he came to the spot for the first time, the rec center that we opened up, and he saw it, and he got emotional, and he started crying. I'm like, what's up, Pop? He was like, I didn't see the vision when you first told it to me. You know what I mean? But like, he was able to actually see all of these kids running around, you know, all of these, he's just hearing the stories that they're telling. And he's seeing, like, we got their report cards and stuff all up on it. Like, he sees the impact now. And, you know, obviously every son wants to make his father proud, but it's deeper than that. Like, when he comes home, we just spent, because I told you I moved him to South Carolina, but he just came up this past week for a funeral. And after the funeral, he took a couple of his homeboys by the site because we're nearing the end of construction now, and he needed to see how much bigger it is now than it was before, you know. But now it's starting to make sense to people. Now, even bro, when I was here, right? I was a bit of a rebel. You know, I learned how to be an activist when I was here, playing for Joe Paterno. I learned how to advocate for myself during my years here at college. And that's no lie, man. I always felt like the outsider here when I was here. You know, I pledged a fraternity, you know what I mean? I was the head of a couple campus organizations. I did things that football players are not supposed to do. And I was almost kicked out of school a couple times for not going along and doing what I was supposed to do. But now, just this past Black History Month, the school did this huge tribute to the work that I'm doing in Baltimore. And that's surreal to me, because while I was here, it wasn't embraced. It wasn't accepted. You know what I mean? Like, people hadn't come around yet to understand that this is important work. You know, so being able to see how those things can change, it makes me even more impassioned about the work. And even you guys that are still here, like, these things matter. Even if you're organizing locally on campus on something that you're passionate about, like, you can change the course of of how these universities move if you're organized, if you're educated, and if you are critically engaged in the process. You know, so that for me has been really amazing.
And even if other people don't see your vision.
Especially when other people, look, I'm the preacher's kid, I'm not the preacher, but I firmly believe that people need to hear this. When God has given you a vision, it's probably not going to make sense to a lot of other people because he didn't give them the vision. If it was for them, he would have given the vision to them. But sometimes you're going to be the only one that sees how something can work or how something needs to be done in order for it to change. And sometimes that's because you're the one that's tasked with doing the heavy lifting. And that can be a heavy burden to bear for some people because, you know, we're human beings that desire community. So you want people to believe in you. You want people to support you. But a lot of times people, when you're doing something that hasn't been done before, people aren't going to believe that it's possible until you do it. But then once you've done it, once you've broken through that glass ceiling, for the rest of their lives, they know, yo, I thought that was impossible until I saw somebody do it. There is no such thing as impossible. Just how do I get it done? You know what I mean? Like, and I truly believe that we can be examples of what that looks like for other people and be a North Star for them to understand that this grand idea that I have, it's scary. Well, it's supposed to scare you. I say, like, if you have a real passion, if it doesn't scare you, it's not grand enough. You know what I mean? Like if it's life's work, that's supposed to be something that you look at and say, man, damn, that's a daunting task. Yeah. But the reward, you know what I mean? Like if, I'm not going to lie to you. What I do is thankless work. You know what I mean? It doesn't necessarily pay the greatest. It doesn't, you know, you don't get all of the things that people would think that you would get that like fill you up. But when one of my youngins comes to me and is like, yo, Mr. Maybin, you put me on with this and look what I did with it. When I tell you there is no better feeling in the world than that. That is what refills the tank, you know, for me. That is what, that's what forces me to deal with all of the BS when it comes my way. Because if it was easy, then it would have been done a very long time ago. How arrogant of me to believe that I'm the first person to come up with this idea. You know what I mean? It's probably been tried 100 times, but it's people that literally have lost their lives trying to do some of these things. So how arrogant of you to think that it's just supposed to be easy, you know? So I take that weight and responsibility as a privilege. I truly do.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you guys.